The call in the rain. The rain was a living thing that night, a relentless beast clawing at the windows of Emily Carter's old Victorian house in Ashwood, Oregon. It was October, the kind of October where the air smelled of damp leaves and the sky never quite cleared. "Who is this?" she asked, her grip tightening on the phone. Another pause, longer this time. The rain pounded harder, a rhythmic assault against the windows. "You're home tonight," the voice said, not a question but a statement. It was male, she thought, though the distortion made it hard to be sure. All alone in that big house. Her stomach twisted into a knot. She stood, the blanket sliding to the floor, and moved to the window, peering through the gap in the curtains. The street was a blur of rain and shadow, the sodium glow of the streetlights barely piercing the downpour. No cars, no figures, just the endless cascade of water. "Who is this?" she repeated, her voice sharper now, edged with fear. The line crackled, and then a soft chuckle, deliberate and chilling. "Look out your window, Emily." Her breath caught in her throat. She yanked the curtain shut, the fabric trembling in her hands, and backed away from the glass. The living room felt exposed, vulnerable, the windows too large, the walls too thin. "I'm hanging up," she said, but her voice wavered, betraying her. "Don't!" the voice said, almost pleading, the tone shifting from menacing to urgent. "You'll want to hear this." She didn't hang up. She couldn't explain why. Maybe it was the way the voice seemed to know her, to see her, or maybe it was the pull of fear, the need to understand what was happening. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Check your back door," the voice said. "It's open." Her blood ran cold. Ashwood was a safe town, the kind where people left their bikes on the porch and didn't bother locking their cars. But Emily was meticulous. She always checked the doors before bed, a habit born from too many true crime podcasts. She'd locked the back door that evening. She was sure of it. "You're lying," she said, but her feet were already moving toward the kitchen, the phone pressed to her ear. The kitchen was dark, the fluorescent light flickering as she flipped the switch. The back door, a heavy wooden slab with a small window, stood closed, the deadbolt in place. She exhaled, a shaky laugh escaping her lips. "It's locked," she said into the phone. "Nice try." "Look closer," the voice said, its tone flat, almost bored. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the deadbolt. The rain was louder here, hammering against the door like it was trying to get in. She leaned forward, peering at the lock, and her heart stopped. The deadbolt was turned, but not fully. Emily, 27, and perpetually tethered to her laptop as a freelance graphic designer, sat curled on the worn couch in her living room, a fleece blanket draped over her knees. The glow of her screen cast flickering shadows across the room, mingling with the faint hum of the storm outside. It was caught just shy of locking completely, as if someone had twisted it but hadn't pushed it all the way. She reached out, her fingers trembling, and turned it until it clicked into place. "How did you know that?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm. The voice didn't answer. Instead, there was a faint sound on the line, like fabric rustling or footsteps on wet pavement. Then, softly, almost too quiet to hear, "I'm closer than you think." Emily ended the call, her hand shaking so badly she nearly dropped the phone. She stood frozen in the kitchen, the rain a deafening roar, drowning out her thoughts. The house felt different now, its familiar creaks and groans no longer benign. Every sound was suspect, the drip of the faucet, the hum of the fridge, the wind rattling the windows. She grabbed a knife from the block on the counter, its weight cold and heavy in her hand, and moved through the house, checking every entry point. The front door was locked, the windows secure. The basement door, tucked in the hallway, was bolted. She even climbed the narrow stairs to the attic, her flashlight beam cutting through the dust, confirming the pull-down ladder was untouched. Back in the living room, she sank onto the couch, the knife still in her hand. The phone sat silent on the coffee table, its screen dark. She told herself it was a prank, some teenager with a burner phone and too much time. But the voice had known her name. It had known about the back door. She tried to rationalize it. Maybe she'd been careless. Maybe the lock had always been loose. But the unease clung to her like damp clothes. Then the phone rang again. She stared at it, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. The screen glowed, unknown caller. She didn't want to answer, but the silence of the house was worse. The not knowing, unbearable. She picked it up, her thumb shaking as she swiped. "What do you want?" she snapped, trying to sound braver than she felt. "You locked the door," the voice said, clearer now, as if the static had faded. "Good, but it won't help." "Stop calling me," she said, her voice breaking. "I'm calling the police." "You won't," the voice said, and there was that chuckle again, low and mocking. "You're too curious. You want to know who I am." She hated that it was right. She hated the pull of it, the need to understand why this was happening. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Someone who's been watching," the voice said. "Someone who knows you, Emily. The way you lead your coffee mug on the counter every morning, the one with the chipped handle." The house, built in the 1890s, groaned under the wind's assault, its wooden beams creaking like an old ship at sea. She'd always found the sound comforting, a reminder of the home's history, but tonight it felt different. The way you sing in the shower, always that same Fleetwood Mac song. The way you check your phone before bed, scrolling through pictures of your old life in Seattle. Her mouth went dry. She glanced around the room, half expecting to see someone standing in the shadows. The curtains were still drawn, the house locked tight, but the words burrowed into her, cold and sharp. "You're lying," she said, but it sounded weak, desperate. "Am I?" the voice said. "Go to your bedroom. Look under the bed." She didn't move. She couldn't. The thought of going upstairs, of bending down to check under her bed, made her stomach churn. But the silence on the line was worse, heavy with expectation. She set the knife down. Her hands were too shaky to hold it, and grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer. The beam trembled as she climbed the stairs, each step creaking under her weight. The hallway was dark, the air cooler up here, and the rain sounded distant, muffled by the thick walls. Her bedroom was at the end of the hall, the door slightly ajar. She pushed it open, the hinges squeaking, and stepped inside. The room was dark, the only light coming from the flashlight and the faint glow of the streetlights through the rain-streaked window. She knelt by the bed, her breath shallow, and shone the light underneath. There was nothing, just dust bunnies and an old shoebox she'd forgotten about, filled with letters from her college days. She exhaled, relief flooding her, but it was short-lived. The phone, still pressed to her ear, crackled. "Find anything?" the voice asked, its tone mocking. "There's nothing there," she said, her voice sharp with anger. "You're full of shit." The voice laughed, a sound that sent a shiver down her spine. "Check again," it said. Closer. She didn't want to, but she did. She lowered herself further, her cheek nearly touching the floor, and swept the flashlight beam across the underside of the bed. Her heart stopped. There, tucked against the far wall, was a small black object. A phone, not hers. It was old, a flip phone, its screen cracked but glowing faintly with an incoming call. She scrambled back, a scream catching in her throat. "What the hell is that?" she said into her phone, her voice rising. "You found it," the voice said, and now it was gleeful, almost childlike in its excitement. "Pick it up." "No," she said, backing toward the door. "I'm done with this. I'm calling the police." "You won't," the voice said again, and this time it was colder, harder, "because if you do, I'll know, and I'll come for you." The line went dead. Tonight, the creaks seemed to carry a message, a warning she couldn't quite decipher. Her roommate, Sarah Miller, was gone for the weekend, visiting her parents in Portland. Emily stood frozen, the phone in her hand silent, the flashlight beam trembling across the room. The rain pounded against the windows, louder now, like fists against the glass. She didn't want to touch the phone under the bed, didn't want to go near it, but she couldn't leave it there either. It was evidence, proof that someone had been in her house. Someone had been in her bedroom. She forced herself to move, grabbing a pair of gloves from her dresser left over from a winter she'd spent shoveling snow, and knelt by the bed again. Her hands shook as she reached for the phone, her fingers brushing its cold plastic shell. She pulled it out, holding it like it might burn her, and flipped it open. The screen showed a single contact, Emily. Her own number. She dropped the phone, a scream catching in her throat. It clattered to the floor, the screen still glowing, and she backed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. She ran downstairs, her bare feet slipping on the hardwood, and grabbed her own phone from the couch. She dialed 911, her fingers fumbling, but before she could hit call, the screen lit up again. Unknown caller. She didn't answer this time, she couldn't, but the ringing didn't stop. It went on, the sound echoing through the house, louder than the rain, louder than her own heartbeat. She threw the phone across the room, watching it skid across the floor and hit the wall. The ringing stopped, but the silence was worse. She stood in the middle of the living room, the knife back in her hand, her eyes darting to every shadow, every corner. The house felt alive now, its creaks and groans no longer random but deliberate, like footsteps pacing just out of sight. She checked the doors again, the windows, the basement. Everything was locked, everything secure, but it didn't matter. Someone had been here. Someone had left that phone. She didn't sleep that night. She sat on the couch, the knife in her lap, the flashlight beam pointed at the front door. The rain slowed to a drizzle as dawn approached, the gray light filtering through the curtains. Her phone stayed silent, but she didn't trust it. She didn't trust anything anymore. The next morning, exhausted and wired on adrenaline, Emily called Sarah. She didn't mention the calls. She couldn't bring herself to say it out loud, but she asked her to come home early. Sarah, sensing something was wrong, agreed, promising to be back by evening. Emily spent the day pacing the house, checking the lock, staring at the flip phone she'd left on the kitchen counter, now dead after its battery ran out. She didn't dare touch it again. When Sarah arrived, her cheerful chatter died the moment she saw Emily's face. Emily didn't mind the solitude. She thrived in it. Her days spent designing logos and websites in the quiet of her home office. But tonight, the emptiness of the house pressed against her. "What happened?" she asked, dropping her bag by the door. Emily told her everything, the calls, the voice, the phone under the bed. Sarah's eyes widened, her hand covering her mouth. "We need to call the police," she said, already reaching for her phone. The officers who came were polite but skeptical. They took the flip phone, dusted it for prints, and searched the house for signs of a break-in. They found nothing, no fingerprints, no forced entry, no record of the calls from the unknown caller. The flip phone was a cheap burner, untraceable, the kind sold at gas stations. They asked Emily if she had any enemies, any exes who might hold a grudge. She didn't. Her life was quiet, her relationships uneventful. The officers told her to change her locks, consider a security system, and call if anything else happened, but nothing else did. The calls stopped. The house returned to its familiar rhythm, its creaks and groans blending into the background. Sarah stayed home more often, her presence a small comfort, and Emily started sleeping with the lights on, the knife within reach. She changed her phone number, installed a security camera at the front door, and had the locks replaced. Life moved on, as it always does, but Emily didn't. Not really. The voice haunted her, its words replaying in her mind like a broken record. The way it knew her habits, her routines, her life. She'd catch herself staring at her phone, waiting for it to ring, or checking under the bed, half expecting to find another phone, another message. She stopped singing in the shower. She threw out the chipped coffee mug. She deleted the photos from her old life in Seattle as if erasing them could erase the voice's knowledge of her. She never found out who the caller was. She never learned how they'd gotten into her house or why they'd chosen her. The police closed the case, citing lack of evidence, and Sarah stopped asking if she was okay, sensing the question only made it worse. But Emily couldn't let it go. She'd walk through the house at night, checking the locks, listening for sounds that didn't belong. She'd stand at the window, staring into the dark, wondering if someone was staring back. On rainy nights, when the wind howled and the windows rattled, she'd sit on the couch, her phone in her hand, and wonder if it would ring again. She'd think about the voice, its mocking tone, its intimate knowledge. Her phone, resting on the coffee table, had been acting strange all evening, buzzing with notifications from an unknown number that left no voicemails, no texts. She'd dismissed them as spam, maybe a telemarketer with a glitchy autodialer, but each buzz had chipped away at her calm. She'd think about the phone under her bed, its cracked screen glowing with her own name, and she'd wonder, with a chill that never quite left her, if the caller was still out there, watching, waiting for the right moment to call again. From that day, she remained thinking about it. The fear a constant companion, a shadow that never quite faded. The house was hers, but it no longer felt like home. It felt like a stage, and she was the unwitting actor, performing for an audience she couldn't see. By midnight, she was on edge, her eyes darting to the phone every few minutes, half expecting it to light up again. It did at 12:32 a.m. The ringtone, a sharp, generic chime cut through the patter of rain like a scream. Emily's heart lurched. She reached for the phone, her fingers brushing the cold glass of the screen. The display read, "Unknown caller." Her thumb hovered over the decline button, but something stopped her, curiosity, or maybe the nagging sense that ignoring it would be worse. She swiped to answer. "Hello?" Her voice sounded small, swallowed by the vastness of the house. A pause filled with faint static, like the sound of distant waves. Then a voice low and raspy, barely audible over the crackle. "Emily?" She froze. The voice knew her name. "Thanks for watching. The veil between our world and theirs is thinner than you think. Each like, each share, each subscription strengthens the connection. Feed the channel before it feeds on you."